Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I'm so happy you're back here with me. I'm really excited about this video because I'm going to do some teaching on what it looks like to be in self-led relationship. You don't ever have control over anyone else, right? But what it looks like for you to be self-led in your relationships and what it looks like to find other people who are self-led so that you can have a self-led relationship together. So I don't really have any shout outs today because the one person gave a gift and wanted to be anonymous. You know who you are. Thank you so much. But I'm really excited about the topic today because I'm doing it for a very exciting reason. I want to make an announcement. I've been hinting here and there for the last several weeks, but this Sunday, on this YouTube channel will premiere the first episode of the first ever podcast that I'm part of, and it's called Self-led Besties. It's with myself, Hallie Shapiro, and David Hilton, both IFS practitioners and my personal self-led besties, IFS Besties. And the whole podcast is really going to be about what it looks like to be in self-led relationship with other people. And so I wanted to make this video so that you understand kind of what we mean when we're talking about being self-led and being in a self-led relationship. So stay tuned for that on Sunday. We're all super excited about it. It will come out whenever it comes out. It'll come out on this YouTube channel as well as all the podcast platforms. So if you just want to listen to it, you can, or if you want to watch the video, you can as well. All right. So without further ado, I'm actually going to share my screen. Hopefully this works. Yay. Okay. So this PowerPoint is actually from a 6-week group that I used to lead. And it was in week 6, it was all about IFS in relationships. So I wanted to share it with you. So really, you can see on the right-hand side, there are 3 types of interactions in relationships. Part to part, which is usually protector to protector, though exiles can interact as well and come up and meet with other protectors. And when our parts are burdened, this is a very ineffective interaction or communication, because we'll see an example at the end here. But when one part of us gets activated and kind of lashes out in protection, the other person's parts usually lash out in equal and opposite force. And it usually doesn't end well. It's what Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of nonviolent communication, calls a tragic expression of our unmet needs, because those protective parts are often quite young and are doing the best they can to protect us, but usually not the other person. So then it elicits their protectors. Okay, we can also have a self to part relationship. And this can be effective because we don't ever have control over any other person. So we can't make them show up in self, right? So if another person is showing up blended with one of their parts that is upset in any kind of way or shut down or whatever their part is having them do to protect them, we can potentially show up in self and give from overflow to that person and be able to kind of look beneath, get curious about what's beneath that part and what are their unmet needs or what are their unhealed traumas or maybe their untrue thoughts that are going on underneath that active part. So potentially a self to part relationship can be effective. Now, sometimes when that happens, if a person's parts are acting out and harming us, a self-led person will create distance between us and this person's active parts. And it's never too much to repeat the definition of healthy boundaries from Prentice Hill. That is the distance between you and I in which I can love both you and I simultaneously. So if I'm up here and you're harming me, I can't love myself. And I really can't love you because my protective parts are going to come out to protect me as well. So I need to keep creating enough distance to where I'm able to protect my own parts from the harmful protectors that you're displaying. And so that I can look at you with some curiosity and say, you know what, even though I disagree with the way those parts are acting out, I still have curiosity around why they make sense and maybe some compassion, right? But from the distance, I can do that. I can't do it here, right? So sometimes the self to part effectiveness is distance. And then the ideal relationship, and any relationship with any given person can move from any of these options at different times. It's not like a person is always in self, right? And that can't be guaranteed either. But when two people are able to be self-led and in relationship self to self, this is a beautiful experience. And we'll talk more about what that looks like in a second. But before I show you what that looks like, um, I'm just going to go over some key concepts of kind of how do you show up in self in your own relationships. It might be a little bit different than you think because you don't force it. There's no forcing. So whenever you basically feel focused on another person's behavior and you notice parts of you that are angry, defensive, hurt, shut down, whatever but they're really fixated on the other person and how terrible they are and how much they hurt you. You can make an IFS, it's called a YOU turn, and just begin to focus on the parts of you that are activated. It might feel like a lot of frustration and anger. It might feel like revenge. It might feel like judgment. It might feel like just pain and shame, right? So you can ask all those parts to kind of identify where they are in or around your body. And now you, yourself, who's not a part, are going to make space for them. You're going to allow them to come up and speak to you and tell. So instead of blending with them and going, oh, I can't believe her or him, I can't believe she did that. She's a no good, rotten, whatever. And you're blended with the parts kind of speaking out like this. Instead, you're asking the parts to come in front of you and they can vent to you, right? So they can say, she did this. Can you believe she did this? She's so terrible. She's evil. And you're listening to that. And you're saying, yes, yes, you have permission to vent. You have permission to say whatever you want to say to me, right? So you're kind of letting the parts. And then you might notice that this really angry one is protecting this really wounded part behind them, right? And so as you observe the parts, you notice more about the dynamic of the parts that are activated inside of yourself. Okay, so once you notice those, then you tend to your own parts first. Again, first with curiosity, and then naturally as they begin telling you their story, and there's like this little bit of distance from you and the parts. It's like another person in front of you who's venting to you and telling you about their suffering. And as your parts tell you their suffering, you naturally will move into compassion toward them. Oh my goodness, honey, I see your suffering and I'm here with you. Wow. Yeah, I see you're so angry because there was an injustice here. You weren't valued and your parts have been hurt. These vulnerable parts you protect have been hurt, right? So the first step in being self-led is actually not to focus on the other person at all, but to go inside and really give loving attention to all the parts that are active in you. Again, bringing up Marshall Rosenberg because nonviolent communication and IFS go hand in hand. Marshall Rosenberg would always say, if you can't bring yourself to have compassion on another person, it's because you have to turn it towards yourself first, toward the parts of you that are active. So that's what you're doing. Whenever you find that you just cannot feel compassion toward another person, it doesn't mean you're a terrible person, right? That's likely not going to be productive. That's going to be other parts who are chastising your judgmental or angry parts. And you can identify them too. and say, I see you. I see why you don't want that part to express themselves tragically. Like you don't want that part to blend with you and create consequences, right, in the relationship. So I get you, but can I listen to the part that's really angry or judgmental to find out the needs underneath? Yes, please help them. Okay. Right. So then you go to that part and you let them vent and you let them tell you everything they want you to know. You don't suppress it. That's not how you are self-led, is by suppressing your angry, defensive, or hurt, shut down parts. No, you actually give them full expression, but instead of blending with you and expressing to other people, they're expressing to you. Yourself is not a part. And then once you fully heard them, then you can interact with your partner's parts from self. Because as your parts feel heard by you, they naturally relax. And then you, yourself, who's not a part, becomes the advocate for them. Because as yourself listens to them, yourself is able to identify the wounds underneath. It's able to identify, oh, it's not really about this person. It's about this past wound that's being, that this person is reminding me of. Or you realize, oh, you know what? I have some unmet needs. This angry part let me know that my need for safety is not being met right now, or my need for being valued and considered is not being met right now. And then you can speak for those parts from a place of calm confidence to the other person once you've listened to your parts. Okay. So then you speak for your parts rather than as your parts. So like I've been showing, instead of being blended with them and saying to the other person, I'm so angry with you, you're such an idiot, or you're so cruel, or calling names and saying stuff like that. Once you listen to your own parts, you can say something like, parts of me feel really angry, because this is the truth, that I have these really protective parts of me that come out when you XYZ, because it really hits this wound from earlier in my life when I was dismissed or abandoned, right? And so when you speak for your parts, it sounds much less threatening to another person's system. If your parts don't believe it, you might propose an experiment and try this and see. Now, another person still may not be a safe person. They may not, sometimes a person's protective parts have organized in such a way that they want to harm others who are vulnerable or honest about their vulnerability. So it may not be safe enough to offer even this vulnerability to another person when they're blended with their parts. It may be safe later, after there's a little bit of time and you can tell that they're not blended with their protective parts anymore, or it may never be safe with certain people. And we have to really grieve that. But because our parts have been heard by us inside, they no longer desperately have to be heard by the other person. And again, sometimes the self-led thing to do is to create some distance with a person who's often blended with parts who harm us. Okay. So we're looking for activated parts and underlying needs, first in ourselves and then in the other person. So if we can't have curiosity and compassion toward the person in front of us, we must turn it on our own parts first. Then once they're able to relax, we have enough space inside of us to have enough self-energy toward the other person. And you will find, again, you don't have to make yourself do this. You'll just naturally begin to feel curious about the other person. Wow, they're really angry. I know that when I have angry parts, they're really loyal to vulnerable parts of me. So I wonder what's happening for them. I wonder what parts this angry part that I'm seeing is protecting in them. They may or may not be able to be introspective themselves about it, but just you inside feeling that way, like understanding, what, my parts always make sense. So I bet theirs do too. There must be some really big wound that's been activated for them for these like ferocious parts to be on the, on the surface protecting them. I wonder what happened, or I wonder what their unmet needs are, right? But we're not able to feel that kind of curiosity toward another person until we've turned toward our own parts. So you might have seen my video recently where I was talking about the MAGA men at the other table, and I was not able to have any kind of openness, curiosity, or compassion towards them, like a stance like that, until I was able to turn toward my own parts and listen to why they felt so activated and threatened by the MAGA men and what they were discussing. Once I fully heard my parts and validated them, they relaxed and opened up enough room for me to feel some curiosity about what felt threatening, if that makes sense. Okay. So I like to say this, that it always takes two people to create a relationship dynamic, but it only takes one to change it, right? So I always say, a relationship takes two people, and you only have control over half of the equation. So just like on the right-hand side here, right? Like you can choose to be the self to the parts that the other person is blended with. You can't make them be in self. You can eventually notice and choose relationships with people who are introspective, who know how to have this relationship with their own parts and show up in self more often. You can choose those kinds of relationships. That's what our podcast is all about. And it just is so, so fulfilling when each person in the relationship is their own primary caregiver and is not grasping at the other person to meet the needs of their parts that only truly their own self can meet. Okay. So I was going to show you, what does it look like to have a self-to-self relationship? This is what it looks like. It's that the self in each person in the relationship, and this could be a partnership, a friendship, parent-child, child-parent, whatever relationship that you have. And again, you don't ever have control over the other person, but you can look for people who are self-led. So in each person, their self, first and foremost, has a vertical relationship with each of the parts in their own inner family. So it's really about the responsibility that each person takes to reparent and give loving attention to whatever is alive in them. That's actually your first priority, is to give loving attention to whatever gets activated in yourself. And you can notice that in another person as well, that they are their own primary caregiver and they take responsibility when they get activated to get curious about what's alive in them, rather than going, you made me this way, or again, that's just their parts that are trying to protect them, right? But if they can't get curious about what activated those parts and what's underneath it, then they can't be self-led, right? And again, your own self can assess that and create the distance needed. So first and foremost, vertical relationship in each person, and then they speak for their parts in the horizontal relationship. Okay. So compassionate witness, I actually made a post today on Instagram about compassion and this nature of compassion that the self has. And so if you have a desire ever to be a compassionate witness for another person, whether it is your child, your friend, maybe you're in a professional capacity as a therapist or a coach or some kind of practitioner. It could be with your partner, right? Like any kind of relationship. If your desire is to show up as a compassionate witness, to be compassionately with another person, this is how you do it. And it's really kind of going to be repeating what I've said already. But to be the listener, a compassionate listener, it requires the listener to be self-led, right? And ironically, like I've already described, the self-led person becomes naturally able to listen to others compassionately when they have listened to themselves compassionately first. So this seems ironic to people because a lot of people think I've got to will myself to listen, to be kind, to care about what this other person is saying, to give them the benefit of the doubt, to know they make sense. It's like there's an efforting there. You can feel that, right? You can feel the suppression of the parts who don't want to feel that or don't feel that. So that's not self-leadership. That could be a self-like part, but it's a manager part that's trying really hard to do the right thing. And you can even see on my face, right, that I'm masking, right? I am not being authentic. I'm really either frustrated with this person, don't really care about what they're saying, or I'm so distracted because I have my own issues right now that it's hard for me to listen, but I'm trying to make myself do it. In self leadership, you don't ever need to make yourself do anything. So even if the person in front of you is suffering and you cannot bring yourself to feel compassion, just like Marshall Rosenberg said, you may need to excuse yourself. Like the kindest thing you can actually do for that person is to say, you know what? I really want to be here for you, but I need to tend to some parts of myself first. And then I will have more capacity to be here for you. Or maybe, maybe you have a friend who's suffering that really wants empathy and compassion and wants to be heard, but you just had a tragedy. You just had something really distressing happen for you. So you can say, I really want to have the capacity to be here for you right now, but I have some things that I'm dealing with. And so the best bet for me is I have to go give attention to myself, my parts first. This is the same in parenting. When our children are driving us crazy or, we just desperately need some time to ourselves to turn in and say, what do you need? Right? I need rest. I need to get out in nature. I need to move. I need to just cry for a moment. As those parts are heard and we meet the needs ourselves, we have the capacity to give from overflow to our children. Sometimes we can't, when our children are young, we can't just leave them by themselves, but we can say, I used to tell my kids, mommy needs a timeout. And timeouts are not bad at all. They're not a punishment. They're actually a really helpful thing where I can go inside and tend to the parts of me that are alive and active so that they can relax and I can have the capacity. Because after I would turn compassion toward my own distressed parts, I could breathe. There was like space and calm and more access to self qualities of calm and confidence and creativity and compassion toward my kids. So that's what I mean when I often say we give from overflow, right? Is that we turn first toward our own selves so that our parts relax enough to make enough room for self that it can overflow onto our children, our partners, our friends, anyone that we're interacting with. All right. So in compassionate witness, the listener ensures they are in self by continuously being connected to their own system. It's not even like you're just aware of your parts beforehand and then you can be in self. I mean, that does happen. But as you are listening to the other person's parts, you might get activated again. There might be certain parts of you that feel judgmental or activated for some reason. And so you're constantly aware of your own system and the activation there so that you can turn toward it lovingly and listen to it and then make more room for self toward the other person. So again, sometimes it means you need to go away for a little bit. And that's okay. If you are interacting with a person who has fears of abandonment and you just want to communicate with them, I'm not leaving you for good. I'm going to go to a private place and tell them exactly how long, right? For 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever time it is. And then I'm going to come back and talk to you. And the reason why I'm doing that is so that I can tend to my own parts and I can show up for you in a better, more loving way, which is what I want to be able to do. Right. So just communicate that to them, that you are coming back and that you're doing this because you care about them, but you need to care about your parts first. And then once you do, again, if your system doesn't believe this, propose an experiment, right? Let me go to the bathroom or the closet, were my favorite places, to just put my hand on my heart and say, oh, beloved, I see you are so angry, or you're so overwhelmed, or you're so, so sad, you're so hurt. I am here with you. You are not alone. Tell me everything you want me to know, right? That's basically what you're saying to your parts when you go to a private place. And just really listening to them, what they need from you, what their unmet needs are, so that you can speak for them to the other person. That's what you're doing. And then you genuinely, there's a transformation that happens where, and you might cry, you might have that wave of emotion and allow it to move through you, release those stress hormones. And then you're left with calm and clarity and confidence. And then you can go speak to the other person. So the self-led person practices noticing and welcoming their own body sensations, emotional energy, thoughts, parts with opinions during their own alone time, so that they can naturally notice what becomes active in them while they're listening to another person as well. So this, because as I describe this, I realize this is kind of an advanced skill, right? It really is something that you propose as an experiment to your parts. It may not be your default at all, right? It may not feel safe to just allow your parts to come up and express themselves and to be vulnerable in front of another person. That's why you've got to find a safe space, a private space, usually like the bathroom or the closet, or outside on a walk in nature or something, right? Where you feel supported, you feel safe enough to have the space for yourself to be the container for all the parts that are feeling suffering and agitation. And then when those parts can feel heard, uh, what I was going to say, sorry, is that there's this natural progression where you might experiment with it in times when your parts are not agitated. You might just have regular times where you go for a walk in nature and you just check who's alive in me. And again, you're observing your pets, what I call your pets, your physical sensations in your body. There's no right or wrong. There's no fixing. It's just noticing, right? Oh, I've got some tightness. Like I'm just noticing right now, I have a little tightness in my belly, a little bit of excitement. I realize I'm kind of talking fast. There's a little bit of excitement in my, like, kind of my chest and throat area. I'm taking a breath as I acknowledge those parts. I'm just modeling this as I talk about it. And the emotional energy that kind of goes along with that, again, is kind of this a little bit of a manic excitement. I notice parts that are just really excited to talk about this topic, and I'm acknowledging them. They're really excited about the podcast. So I'm noticing what's alive in me by just paying attention to my physical sensations, my emotional energy and thoughts. And I notice parts that are saying, you're talking too fast, Christine. So they're kind of these critic managers. And I'm acknowledging them and thanking them. So again, as I notice these things, I just turn toward them and appreciate them and express acknowledgement and love toward them. And they begin to relax. So as you practice that, again, you can just practice it for 1 or 2 minutes each day of noticing your pets' physical sensations, emotional energy, and thoughts, and turning toward them. Oh, I see you. I see you. I'm here with you. That's it. And then gradually, when your system gets more activated, right, and you feel overwhelming anxiety, overwhelming pain, overwhelming anger, you can be, oh, your system goes, oh, yeah, we can turn toward that and be with it and listen to it, because the one who gives it attention is bigger still, right? So your system has to gain evidence that it's okay to do that. It has to be in a safe space. It's still incredibly difficult for me to do it in front of any other person, but it's okay. I can, advocate and get some privacy for even just a couple minutes. If you're in a public place, you can ask to go to the bathroom. And again, turn toward the suffering inside of you and say, beloved, I see you and I'm here with you. Okay. A self-led person does not need to blend with or suppress their own parts or the other person's parts. So this is really important because a lot of people think that being self-led means that I'm not I'm suppressing my angry parts or my parts that want to lash out or my parts that feel shame or criticism or judgment or frustration or whatever, right? But it doesn't mean that. It means, and I have already explained this, but we don't have to blend with them to get the attention of the other people, but we also don't need to suppress them. We invite them to come up and talk to us. So we might ask them if they can just stand right in front of us, be nose to nose with us, to unblend just enough so that we can give them attention. And then when we don't have to suppress our own parts, we don't have to suppress other people's parts either, because we can say, like I said, if they have this really big protector in place, I wonder what it's protecting. I wonder why it makes sense. I wonder what's vulnerable underneath, right? Every person's parts make sense. So a self-led person can welcome their own parts and then speak for their parts rather than identifying with them. And I've already explained all that. I'm going to go through this really quickly. This is another kind of modality that I think fits kind of well with IFS. It's just kind of another way of saying the same thing. But authentic relating is something that you can do with any other person. And you don't have to use this language exactly because, with nonviolent communication or authentic relating, a lot of times people get attached to the wording and then other people think it's really weird, right? They're like, what are you saying? Even, I'll say, I'm curious what's most alive in you right now. And some people don't use that kind of language. So you can change the language to whatever makes sense to the person you're talking to. Like, I'm wondering what's on your mind the most these days, or what's taking up the most attention, in your thoughts these days, or what's the biggest thing that is either upsetting or exciting to you, that kind of thing. And then the sharer then basically says, what I notice most alive in me is, so if you're doing this with two self-led people, the person who is self-led is going to be checking basically for their own pets, right? They're going to take a moment and say, oh, I'm noticing a part that's like really preoccupied with something that happened earlier this morning with one of my children. And I'm noticing that it feels just a lot of anxiety. I'm getting shame, right? So the person who's sharing is paying attention. They have that vertical relationship with their pets, right? Their parts, what's alive in them. And then they're speaking for it to the other person. And then the other person in turn, especially when they're the listener, they are noticing as they're listening to what's alive in the other person, what becomes alive in them. Usually what we have is we'll notice, I have parts that really resonate with something, right? They're feeling empathy for that experience. Or I notice a part that is concerned about this or wants to clarify, is this what you mean? But again, instead of blending with that part and saying to the other person, so do you mean this? Or, man, I totally had that experience too. You're blending with the part. Instead, you're speaking for the part. So you're saying, When you shared that, what I noticed come alive in me was a part that felt concerned and wanted to know if you meant this. And if you observe yourself enough, you can say that part feels worried because it had this experience in the past. So it's not about you, and it's not like trying to put angst or stress on you. It's I understand that it's about this part and it's past history, but it's saying that it would be really helpful to this part if you filled in this part of the story or gave it some kind of understanding, right? So you're speaking for the part to the other person. This can be something that you can try, especially if you have a friend or loved one who knows IFS, and just experiment with what does it look like to be in a self-led relationship. You can try it out. All right. Okay, this is the last slide I'm going to share. And this is kind of just an example of two people who are in a relationship. Maybe they're partners or friends. Um, but one person, they're basically at the top, they're both blended with parts, right? So the one person says, "You never asked me about my work. You know I'm having trouble." Right? So it's kind of a aggressive part of blaming, pointing, "You don't do this." And then, of course, because that person is blended with protective parts, the other person's protective parts come online in equal and opposite force. And they say, "Well, you talk about your work all the time. You were complaining about it all last night." And you see how both of their protective parts are pointing at the other. "You did this, you did that," kind of blaming, right? And that's a part to part relationship and often does not go well. I don't think it ever goes well. Okay, but if the two people are self-led, what they might do is they might say that, and then they'll notice, "Ooh, I notice that there are parts of me that are activated right now." And the other person are like, "Oh yeah, I notice there are parts of me that are activated. Let's choose to go our separate ways, go to a private place for 5-10 minutes, whatever the agreed upon time is, to do tend to our vertical relationship with our parts, each of us, right? And then we can come back together and speak for them." So person A might go away and realize, let me notice the emotions and the physical sensations and the thoughts, right? And notice that they're feeling alone and uncared for, and that those emotions are basically burdens from an abandoned child part of them, and that what their need underneath is really to be heard and cared for. And so the first thing is for the self to provide those needs for the abandoned child, to say, "I am here with you. I want to hear everything about what's going on for you and your work, and I care about you." And there can genuinely be this vertical relationship. I know some people that are parts, I guess, who think it's not the same thing to be heard by yourself versus another person. And while we do absolutely need people, and it can be really powerful when other people are able to hear our parts, they just cannot possibly be there for us 24/7, and we can't control whether they're self-led or not. And in my experience, the love and care and attentiveness and faithfulness and loyalty of the self is by far the most powerful relationship that my young parts have. And it is sufficient for them. So sometimes after that vertical relationship of tending to them, they don't even need the other person to really get them or listen to them anymore. And there really is a capacity to get curious about the competing need of the other person and why they're not able to give that to me. Other times they still want to have that connection with the other person, if the other person is self-led and capable of it. And so myself might then speak for the parts. Like when the two people come back together, person A might say, "Okay, so what I noticed was that there was an abandoned child part of me that felt alone and uncared for and just really wanted to be heard and cared for. Like that was the need. And I was making the strategy that you had to be the person that heard her and cared for her. But I was able to care for her a bit. And so I don't feel as like desperate for you to hear about my work. But if there's a time when you'd like to hear what's going on in my work, just let me know or something like that. Right. Okay. So then person B goes likewise somewhere by themselves to tend to their vertical relationship with their parts and realizes that they also feel alone and uncared for, that they're not being recognized, right? That there's an unseen child. They're not being recognized for their efforts all the times they have been listening. And so what they need is recognition for their efforts and maybe some rest. Maybe they just came home from work and they're really tired themselves and they just don't have the capacity to offer empathy, compassion. They need to rest first. So again, going inside, assessing that, attending to their own parts. Then when they come back, they can say, oh, okay, interestingly, I also had parts who felt alone and uncared for, but they mainly felt unrecognized for their efforts. And I have a young part that often felt unseen. And so that was activated. And I'm also noticing that I'm really tired from work and I need rest. Would it be possible if I just go take a nap or veg for half an hour and then I'd love to hear about your work over dinner, right? So all of the both of the person's needs have been assessed by themselves. They've spoken for them to each other, and then they can create a creative strategy to meet them, which involve might involve that person, or they might say, I really just don't have the capacity because I'm dealing with my own things right now. How do you feel about calling your sister? Or, or something like that, because the needs are essential. Both of their needs need to be met, to be heard and cared for, to be recognized for their efforts, to have rest. But they doesn't have to be attached to the strategy of the other person meeting that need. The first person was essentially able to meet that need for their abandoned parts themselves and hear them out and care for them. And this person might also be able to really recognize the efforts of those parts and say, I see you've really been trying, and I see you're really tired. Right. So, and then their strategy might be other people, or it might be a different time or in a different way. So I hope that makes sense. So thanks for letting me share that with you, and share with me if you either understand what I'm saying, or if you have questions about what I'm saying, or if you have ever been in a relationship with two self-led people. Maybe you can't even fathom that. Maybe you're just figuring out what it even looks like for you to be self-led. That's wonderful, right? Again, you can't unless you feel safe. Or maybe you are really working to create boundaries and distance with someone who is not self-aware and is blended with their parts all the time, right? So yeah, let me know what you're working with, what your experience has been, or have you experienced being in a self-led relationship, even if it's just periodically, with a partner or a friend or someone who knows IFS, and the grief and the pain of knowing that another person is not self-led and that their parts are not safe for you. There can be a lot of grief and pain in that as well. So if you have listened this far, go ahead and leave an emoji that has to do with relationships. So it could be, partners or a parent-child or a friends or just relationships of some kind. You can leave an emoji in the comments and I will know that you listened to the end. And I'm so excited for you to hear our first Self-led Besties podcast coming out on Sunday. May we all be ever so kind to ourselves in all our parts until we meet again. See you next time.